How do I get the Tanium client on my Azure virtual machines? Find out on today's Tanium Tech Talk. Well, welcome back to Tanium Tech Talks. I'm your host, Ashley McGlone. Whether it's clients or servers, virtual machines are as common as passwords on sticky notes. I hope it's more common than that, but VMs are everywhere on-prem and in the cloud. And today we're looking at how to get the Tanium client onto your Azure VMs, and that goes for both Windows and Linux. So ARM templates and policies are going to be our familiar tools of choice here. And back on the show to explain this process is our Microsoft technology expert, Rob Brawl. You've probably seen some of his other popular episodes on the show, like deploying MDE, Tanium Provision, and Zero Trust. So welcome back, Rob. Please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Ashley. Nice to be back. As you said, I've been along and done a few shows with you over the last year or so, but I'm based in the UK, work with some of our financial services customers. Prior to Tanium, I was on the customer side for a while, so I've been through it all over the years.
Well, it's good to have you back, Rob, and it was good to see you in person at Converge last year. And you're hitting on some really good topics. And first off, for this, obviously Azure VMs super common for years now. So, what's the backstory here? What's the problem we're trying to solve?
Really, really straightforward. You have some VMs in Azure, so they could be newly created or existing ones. How do we ensure the Tanium client is on them? We've got things like Discover and so on. There are some challenges in cloud with that, and actually there are native capabilities in Azure that make this even easier for us. And what we're going to look at today is just a few of the options that are available. We won't go into all of them, but there is a community article that will link that goes into loads more detail. It's got the code snippets we're going to use and all that kind of thing. So the outcome is that you can either manually, by going into a virtual machine, or at the point where you create the virtual machine, make sure the Tanium client is deployed, or you can set up a policy, and that's what we'll look at as well. That means if a virtual machine meets some criteria that you set, perhaps it's in a resource group using a particular template, that kind of thing, then we'll put the Tanium client on there. And it avoids you having to use things like the Azure scripting engine or other mechanisms to get the client installed.
It sounds like there's a number of options. I know prior to the show, when I looked at that community or that resource center article that you referenced, it seemed like there's a number of techniques that we can use. I'm curious, what are you hearing from customers who are leveraging these techniques?
So I spoke to one of my financial services customers about this actually when it was first kind of announced in early preview late last year. And they were really excited. So they're a huge Azure customer. They do a lot with Azure. They're a great bunch to work with, really forward thinking. And they were really excited by it because they were currently using the scripting engine to deploy Tanium, along with a bunch of other things. And their approach was, well, we can get rid of that entirely because we can use the VM extension to get Tanium on. And then we were also talking to them about Automate at the same time and what that can do for them. And they were, well, the two go together really well. So we can move away from scripting entirely, which is higher workload to maintain. It could be more error prone. It's harder for people just to touch and understand. We can use VM extension to put Tanium on, and then Automate. We can go with a low code approach to do everything else that the scripting agent is doing. And it's far more visible. It's much easier to maintain.
Maybe we should kind of reel back just for a second and talk about what is an extension for an Azure VM. Maybe some people aren't familiar with that concept.
So an extension is basically like an app store on your mobile phone. So when you're deploying a VM, and we'll look at this, there are a series of services, products, tools that are available within Azure to apply to a virtual machine, either once it's already built or at the process of building it. You can include them in your templates, that kind of thing. So that it could be things like Tanium client, obviously us. There are various EDR tools, other system utilities that you might be deploying. And it's effectively a first-party way of getting third-party apps and services into those VMs.
So basically, Tanium is in the Azure VM App Store, kind of.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, why don't you show us how this works?
We've got a few examples. The community article we mentioned here, so you will need login for this, and I'm sure we'll link it. But if you search for Azure VM extension within our help site, you'll be able to get this detail. We're just going to touch on a few of the items today. So we'll start off with creating a new virtual machine in Azure, and we'll use the UI method to do it. So we're not going to use a template. We'll just go with next, 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 walk through, and we'll see what happened. Then we'll look at an existing VM that's already been built, and we'll push the Tanium client to that. Pretty straightforward. And then we'll go on to the other side of things, which is using policies, so that anything new that is created, regardless of whether the person that's building it or not tells the VM to have the Tanium agent on it, will get it. And then finally, we can look at the remediation approach. There's obviously loads of ways you can interact with Azure as well. You've got things like the AZ client, there's PowerShell modules, Python, all sorts. We're just going to do it through the UI today, keep it kind of simple and accessible to everybody. But what we're doing is all available through those other mechanisms as well. And that community article does discuss quite a few of them. So if you want to get into the more automated approach of setting this up, it's all there. It's all for the consumption. So before we can deploy our virtual machine or create a policy, we need our tanium.init.dat file. So you can get this from client management very easily. Go into client management, and there is this option, download cloud initialization file, and that will give you your DAT. Once you've downloaded it, we need to base64 encode this. And again, this is on the help article, but basically in PowerShell, we're going to use this command here and point it to the file. One thing to point out, you do need to fully qualify the path to the file. So even if it's in the same directory you're in, it won't work. You just need to put the full path in there. Then you'll get something like this. You just want to copy it. Be careful when you copy it. Make sure you get the whole thing, because obviously it's got to be completely correct for it to work. Watch out for any line breaks, that kind of thing. Once you've got that, I would paste that into a notepad somewhere so you're ready to go. We'll now go into Azure, and we're going to create a virtual machine. So you'll see we've got a couple here already that are ready for some of the later demonstrations we're going to do. So I'm going to create VM. We'll pop it in our existing resource group. Let's call this to Tanium client. Obviously, we're going to be trashing this after the demo, so it doesn't really matter about the configuration, but we'll just give it some credentials. Our storage. Get rid of our public IP address when we're finished. Don't need any management for this, or monitoring. And then on the advanced tab, and this is obviously where I'm going through the UI and doing this, you would configure all this with a template. The extensions option is what we're interested in. So we can select an extension to install. And you'll see you've got various options. So there's things like monitoring tools, pipelines, and so on. And if we search for Tanium, we'll see Tanium client for Linux shows up. We hit next, give that a second. And what this will do is load an additional form that we need to populate. So it's going to want things like our server name and the DAT information. So I have this on the screen ready to go. We'll paste in our DAT file, and our server name is just our standard access point that we would use. You can configure lots of other things if you need to, but that's the minimum that you need to get going.
And so that server name for cloud customers, for example, would be like their Tanium Cloud URL, right?
Yeah, so it's the two names that exist. We've got a couple of different variations depending on when you became a cloud customer, but yeah, it's the standard server name list information that you can see.
And do they need to? Is there like? Do you need to put both of them in there, or just like comma delimited, or just one? How?
So in reality, the DAT file contains it anyway if you're a cloud
Okay.
customer.
Hmm.
I know there is some work going on to simplify this form a little bit further, because if you're a cloud customer, technically you don't need the server name at all anyway, because the DAT file contains everything the client needs to get going. There's just some validation changes that are needed this side of the configuration. So hit create, and then we'll see we've got the Tanium client Linux showing there. If I wanted to do anything else, clearly I could at this point, but we don't need to. Don't need any tags. We'll hit review and create, and it's going to show us what it's going to build. Okay, so we're on our final page. We've got our validations completed, and we hit create. And what this will now do is create our virtual machine in exactly the same way as normal. So this is completely standard, completely what you would normally expect to see. So we let that run, and then as it completes, we'll start to see results show here. So do things like create the disk, the network, public IP address. Once all the underlying components that are needed for the virtual machine are there, we'll see, bang, there we got our new virtual machine. So give that a couple of minutes and that will finish. Once the virtual machine's finished, it will then push the Tanium client to it really quite quickly, typically within a couple of minutes from my testing. Obviously, Azure is a big shared environment, so things will happen at different speeds. We can see there the Tanium client for Linux is being pushed, so it's a discrete resource that's being pushed to the VM. Okay, so once we're in Tanium, we can go into client status in the usual manner, and we can see this machine here has appeared. Ubuntu new TC, that was what I called it. And if I go back home, go into online endpoints, we should see our new machine. Yeah, so there's a couple of SQL servers I've been doing another project with, and again, our new Ubuntu Tanium client. So that was, I guess, the simplest approach. We built a VM and we told Azure to put the client on for us at the point that it deploys. Pretty easy. The next example is, okay, I've got another VM that already exists, and I want that to have the Tanium client on it. I know where it is. I haven't got to go and search for it. So pretty straightforward. So in that case, we go back into virtual machines, and we'll take this one, Ubu manual. And then what you can do is go into settings on the virtual machine, and then extensions and applications. And then if we hit add, you'll get exactly the same window that we just saw. We hit next, and this is going to give us the same screen that we had when we were creating the virtual machine. We'll just let that load, and we will fill this out quickly. So we've created our deployment against that existing virtual machine, and exactly the same thing effectively happens now as when we created it as part of building a new VM. It's already there. It's not something that we've got to go and create from scratch. It's just layering it on top of the existing VM. But pretty straightforward. That will obviously go off and do its thing. We see, hey, it was successful. Now coming back into Tanium, we can already see Ubu manual, that newly deployed client has already shown up, registered, client extension, so on will come up now. So that was just two mechanisms to deploy those agents. There's obviously loads. You can use things like the AZ command, there's PowerShell modules, lots of different ways of doing it. That was just showing you a couple of them.
Yeah, my next question is regarding ARM templates. I know that's
Yep.
a popular way to provision in an automated pipeline. Would we just take that base64 DAT file then and paste that string into our ARM template?
Effectively, yes, along with some configuration that says we should also have the Tanium agent deployed. And if you go to our help article that we've discussed this, we give you an example of a complete one that's built out. So how to build a VM. So in this case, it's Windows Server 2022. You can pick the various specifications and so on. And if we come down here, you see all the configuration for the networking, storage. There is this piece that's added, I've highlighted, that is the configuration that says you should also have the Tanium agent installed. And the piece where you were just talking about the base64 DAT file, that goes in there. So if you've got an existing ARM template, you can effectively lift this piece, add it in at the appropriate point. So we're giving you a complete one there so that you can hopefully see how it would fit with your existing deployment. But yeah, exactly that. The customer that I worked with and talked to about this was very invested in ARM templates, as you'd imagine. We've looked at how we can do this kind of one by one. That doesn't really scale terribly well. And you always have the issue that I'm a large organization and lots of people might be deploying things. And there might be people that are unaware that the Tanium client should be on there. Perhaps they go and pick a VM from the store without using my ARM templates, and it doesn't have the Tanium client configured as part of it. That's where policies come in. So policies can do two things for us. Specifically for Tanium, they can do lots of other things within Azure, but we're only talking in the context of the Tanium clients here. They can go and find devices that don't have the Tanium agent on them already, and we can put criteria in for where we want to look. We're going to keep it really simple with this. We're just going to look at a particular resource group and look for Ubuntu virtual machines, but we could look for lots of other things, loads of criteria you can use if you wish to. So that will find things that already exist on the device. And then within Azure, the other option that we have available to us is to apply this automatically for newly built devices. So if you go and build something and it doesn't have Tanium on it, doesn't matter because the policy will apply and do it for you. So it really gives us that nice control and validation that it really is happening. One requirement for this to set it up, we need an identity. So there's effectively a service account within Azure that's used to make the change to the virtual machine to push the client to it. And once that's set up and has permissions over the correct resource group that contains those virtual machines, we can create the policy. So we'll create that first. And again, that's documented on our community article here. So what we need to do is create this managed identity first. So we go into managed identities. We're going to create one. Okay, so we press the button to create a new managed identity. I'm going to put it in my VM extensions resource group, try and keep things tidy. What region do I want it to be located in? I've used ECUS for all of this. Clearly, as long as you've got the right permissions in place, it will work. And we're just going to call this Tanium Managed Identity. Don't need any tags. And we've created it. So Azure will build that for us now. The next thing we need to do is grant permissions to it. So to do this, we go to the resource group itself, and then we delegate rights to that managed identity. So if I go back home, I go into my resource groups, I can see them all here. Azure VM extensions is the one I care about. Then go into access control, IAM. And then if we follow our article, we need to press the add button, and then role assignment. And then the role that we need is virtual machine contributor. So that has the required permissions to be able to add the VM extensions. We can just search for that. We'll see it at the bottom, select it, press next, and then assign access to. So this we need to change to a managed identity, press select, and then we can make sure we've got the correct subscription selected, managed identity, and it's a user assigned managed identity, and then we can see that identity that we just created. If you've got lots in your environment, then you can obviously search for it in the usual way. Then hit review and assign. That's what we're expecting. We can see virtual machine contributor and that identity. And then we've assigned it. So really straightforward. With these, there's no certificates or keys or anything like that to manage. You just create it, and then you can use it with Azure. So now we've done that, the next piece we need to do is go into policies themselves. So to create a policy, we can go back to the Azure homepage and either search for, or if, like me, you've got it already shown here, go into policy, and then you want to expand authoring and definitions. And then you'll see lots of policies already exist in here, but in this case, we're just going to go into plus for policy definition, select a subscription to put it in. So in this case, it's going to be pay as you go, and then we give it a name, so Tanium 2. And then categories are just a way of grouping policy types together. I've already got a policy category that's called Tanium, and that's what we're going to use. Now, down the bottom here, you'll see some boilerplate policy definition JSON. We can just delete all of that. And in this case, I've got a policy that's going to apply to any Ubuntu 2204 build that's found in the resource group we care about. So we'll see up here that the image came from Microsoft, and it's that one. So it's the Gen 2 2204 build, which matches what I've got deployed as some template virtual machines. And then we'll see the critical bits I'll just call out. It's looking for deploy if not exists. So if it doesn't exist, we're going to put the Tanium client for Linux on. And if we come down a little bit further, we can see some config around the Tanium client, and it's going to be wanting things like our DAT file, for example. So at that point, we'll just hit save, and it creates it. So what we've done is defined the policy, but we haven't applied it to anything yet. So nothing has happened other than creating it at this point. We're not going to start affecting VMs. When we assign the policy, the first thing it's like kind of the first of two stages that we can enact happens. So once the policy is assigned, any newly built VMs that meet the criteria of it, so they're in our resource group, and you'll see that in a minute, and they're using that image, will have the Tanium client pushed to them automatically. So I don't have to do anything, it will just happen. I can then optionally go one step further and tell the policy to go and look for virtual machines that already exist within Azure, within the scope that I define, and deploy the Tanium client to those as well. So that kind of, you've got the fix it forward and then the mop up what's already there. For the second stage, where it's searching, you can verify the results by eye before you actually go and apply the Tanium client to everything. It gives you that level of control that clearly you're going to want when it comes to change and that kind of thing. Next thing to do is hit assign policy, and then you can see just a form that we fill out. So what's the scope? It's this subscription. If I want to define exclusions, I can. We're not going to go into that with this. We'll keep it simple, but what's the policy? So it's that one we just created. And then the parameters. So we need our DAT file, and I'm just going to copy that in from my other screen again quickly. So remediation. So what's it going, how is it going to do this? So if I go into user managed identity and then select my subscription, and then the resource group I want this to apply to, it's going to be Azure VM extensions. And then we'll see here this existing assigned identities option. So we can select that Tanium managed identity that we created earlier on. So that's the credential in effect that it's going to use. Next option, any non-compliance messages. We don't need to get into that with this. Again, Microsoft have got lots of docs around how this works if you want to get into further details with that. Review and create, and then create. And that will then go and create the policy. And you'll see up here that it'll take up to about 15 minutes to start kicking in. Clearly, there's like replication, that kind of thing happens within the Azure world. If I come back now, we can see our Tanium Ubuntu policy is there. And I can go into this, and what you will start seeing once it's had a chance to evaluate all of the virtual machines within Azure, you will see devices down here showing up. So our or UBU policy VM that I created would show up in here. What you can then do is press remediate, and that is now going to go and look for virtual machines to go and fix. Now, remediate is a one-time thing. So it's only the virtual machines that it found at that point that it will apply to. So it's not an ongoing, if something was somehow created, didn't have the client deployed to it, and then it finds it, it won't fix that. It's only fixing things that it's found at that point in time. So again, it's quite safe to run. It's not something that is going to cause you a problem if you forget about it.
So help me understand there. This is a remediation policy in Azure,
Yeah.
but I still got to click the button. It's not like it's not a continual policy. So anytime a new VM is created.
So newly created VMs, you're good. They will always now, as long as they meet the scope of that policy, they will have the Tanium client deployed to them. The bit that is like one time or on demand is go and find things across my Azure estate that do not have that client deployed to them, and then go and do that. So this will take, say, quarter of an hour, 20 minutes or so, in my experience, to go and figure out what is missing, and then it will go and remediate them if you tell it to.
And so that makes sense. I've just created a policy. This says retroactively, go find everything that doesn't meet this and fix it.
I'm going to want a bit of control over that.
Okay. And then going forward, it should all be okay.
Yeah, so if I was to go and create another virtual machine now, that will automatically put the Tanium client on it. We need to give it a little bit of time for the policy to fully apply across the Azure estate. But yeah, that is the end result, that you then don't need as part of that wizard or as part of your ARM template or however else you're deploying virtual machines to include it because it's just done for you by the policy.
Well, Rob, thank you for joining us with this again today. I tell you, you make this look easy. That
Hopefully, this is it's a bit more complicated, this one, but it's a really useful little thing to have available.
Yeah, and I just want to call out too, folks. If you walk through this article, it's linked in the show notes below. But if you walk through this article and you run into any trouble, don't forget about our Tanium community out there, help.tanium.com, and you can jump to up there on the little menu and go into the Tanium community. There's lots of places there where you can ask questions and get answers. So if you run into any issues, feel free to go out there and talk to your peers who are doing this, and other partners, Tanium employees will be able to answer your questions there, in addition to whatever other support channels you normally use. So Rob, question then, as far as like cloud versus on-prem, obviously a Tanium cloud instance, this would work. On-prem, I'm guessing, as long as it's not like air gapped, as long as you've got normally on-prem customers are going to have a publicly exposed address for your clients to point to the Tanium server. So I'm guessing just an Azure VM would be another client that could connect to an on-prem instance as well.
Yeah, absolutely. As long as there is a way for that VM to connect to your Tanium service, then yeah, it just works. So that could be zone servers on-prem. If it's coming out of the public internet, you might have express routes, that kind of technology in place with effectively a private link to Azure. So yeah, as long as there is a network connection and a way for that VM to reach your Tanium service, then on-prem is just as well off as cloud here.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah. Any other troubleshooting tips you'd give us? I know anytime you're doing things in Azure, anytime I should say outside, anytime you're doing something with JSON, there's always a curly brace somewhere that's missing. Yeah. But any other tips you have just on, what are the top things to look at when you're troubleshooting if for some reason it's not working?
If you do get a failure when you're going through the deployment, it will, rather than coming up all green and happy, you will see the failure. You can click into that and it will show it for you. I was troubleshooting something last week, I think it was, with this, and I hadn't seen it before, and it gave me a path on the virtual machine that I could go and look at. And that actually gave me more verbose information. So I could see the path where it was working, and there were some logs there I could look at. But to be honest, typically within the Azure portal, when you're working with it, it will show you, it'll tell you what's gone wrong. If there's an issue with like field validation or something, the developers have tried to be clear about the field names, that kind of thing. So there's not some really, I don't know, var2 or something as an unhelpful variable name. It will say something like, I don't know, Tanium client port or something like that. And it makes it quite easy for you to see where you might have gone wrong.
Well, Rob, thank you again for another walkthrough. I'm sure this will be as popular as your other ones. And thank you for joining us. It's always great to see you again. And for those of you who are watching, again, we've mentioned it several times, out on our Tanium Resource Center, help.tanium.com. You can go search for Azure Extension Install. Just put those words in there. The article comes right up. Also, the direct link is in the show notes below. There's a full walkthrough there. As you've come to expect on these shows, right, we're going to give you the resources to help you be successful. So I hope that this works out for you and you're able to bring those Azure VMs under management. And as always, if you have questions, like we said earlier, go out to the Tanium community site where we'd be happy to answer those questions. So thank you for joining us for this episode of Tanium Tech Talks. Until next time, go Tanium.